What is up, night crawlers? Welcome back to the Nightmare's Edge. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. I have 3 great stories to bring to you. They are written by Darkheroxx, Zachary Gale, and Charlie Blackmoore. I hope you guys enjoy them as much as I do. The links to their socials will be listed in the description. Be sure to show them some love. Now, sit back, relax, and let me tickle your inner fears. I Was Gone for Hours by Darkheroxx. I'm a homebody. I could stay in my room browsing the internet for hours, and I'd be perfectly content with my life. My friends Tom and Brittany, on the other hand, are always up to something. I joke that they have enough energy to spend that they don't need me around, but they find a way to drag me out of my hole. We've been friends ever since we were kids, and whenever they force me to tag along on their hikes, despite my constant groaning, I'm always happy to be with them. My friends would usually fight with me whenever they bring up an activity that required me to go outside, but I bring my foot down when it comes to water. When I was a kid, I almost drowned at the beach. My tiny body got caught up in the waves, and my mom wasn't able to get to me. Thank God a group of teenagers were close by, and one of them was able to get me to safety. Ever since then, I just stayed away from water. So when Tom had brought up the idea of kayaking, it was no one's surprise to hear my answer was a hard no. A couple days passed as my phone was being barraged, this time with text messages assuring that it'll be so much fun and it would be lame without you around. It was the day before the trip when I caved in, not because my friends were constantly begging me, but they had invited my crush. I know, it sounds extremely lame, but I really liked this girl that Brittany knew. So, I very reluctantly grew a pair and agreed to go kayaking. The next morning, we all packed into Brittany's car and made the hour trek to the river. When we got there, we were able to rent some kayaks. Usually, there would be some that could have 2 people in them, but to my dismay, there were only the singles. Great. I looked at the river while putting on my life vest, preparing myself to not drown. The water didn't seem that deep, so I thought maybe things would be okay. Brittany, Tom, and my crush were experienced, and were able to get in their kayaks with ease. I, on the other hand, had struggles for a few minutes, so I lagged behind a bit. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, but the kayak was steady, and I copied the others as they were moving ahead of me. They must not have noticed that I was getting further behind, and I was cursing myself that I was actually doing something like this. After a few minutes, I seemed to be getting the hang of it, so it wasn't all bad, though it really sucked not being with the rest of my group. The waters were calm, so I was able to move with ease, and my disdain turned into cockiness as I thought I was doing well for my first time. I looked ahead to see there was a turn ahead. My friends were out of sight, so I paddled a bit faster to catch up. My heart sank when I took the left turn to see a long stretch of empty water. The river went on, with no signs of another soul. There was no way they had just disappeared. I was only a few minutes behind, right? That's when I noticed how quiet it was. There was no sound of anyone, no rustling of the leaves from the wind, and the water beneath me was dead silent. I looked down the river. The water, once a beautiful shade of blue, was now a dark and murky green. There were no ripples upon the water's surface, and I realized that the kayak was stopped dead in its tracks. I thought perhaps I was just overthinking things, and my group was just further off than I thought. But as I looked forward to the long stretch of empty water, I wasn't sure what else to think. I gripped my paddle and forced myself forward. That was all I could do. I paddled through the murky water. There was a resistance as if I was moving them through a thick sludge. A few minutes passed and my arms were already aching, but I had to catch up to my friends. Was I even going anywhere? I looked around. All the trees were the same, and there were no identifiable marks for me to even know if I was moving at all. Fuck! I cursed to myself as I frantically tried to push myself forward. The water felt thicker and heavier as I moved the paddle through it. I pushed and I pushed as hard as I could, until suddenly, the right side of the paddle was stuck in the water. I slowly looked down. I couldn't see anything beneath the cloudy green water, and the right side of my paddle was completely submerged. My arms were already out of strength. I tried my best to yank the paddle out of the water, but it wouldn't budge. I heard a noise that broke through the absolute silence I was trapped in. A very light tapping coming from underneath me. Thump, 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 thump. The noise was drumming underneath the entirety of my kayak. Then I felt my body jolt as I began to sink. No, the kayak wasn't sinking. Something was pulling me down into the depths. The paddle pulled away from my grip and I saw hands, bloated, gray hands, reaching from the water and onto the edges of my kayak. I let out a scream as I watched the hands grip onto the kayak and pulling me into the water. I had nowhere to go and there was nothing else I could do. It all happened in seconds, but it felt like an eternity as I slowly turned and my body began to crash into the river. My face crashed through the water. My eyes stung and my skin burned. The water was so freezing cold. I looked around and realized that I wasn't alone after all. I was surrounded by bodies of all ages, all sizes, bloated bodies of men and women. All of them were reaching out towards me. I felt something grab onto my ankle, and in my horror I saw a small, childlike hand gripping onto me. I looked into the dead and cloudy eyes of what looked like a young girl. Her face twisted into a visage of agony as she began to climb up my leg. Then another set of hands, then another. Despite me wearing a life vest, I was being pulled further and further down. I finally lost it. I kicked my legs and waved my arms in an attempt to pull myself back up, but now their arms were wrapped around my waist. I lost my breath, and I looked up to see the bubbles float upwards towards my escape. My ears began to pop as I sank deeper and deeper. My body felt so cold and my chest ached as water began to flow into me. I saw a young girl, a teenage boy, an older woman, and a middle-aged man gripping onto my torso, and I noticed that not only were they pulling me down, they were using me to swim back up. I watched as their bodies began to float upwards and my vision began to fade to black as I dropped deeper into this watery hell. Next thing I knew, I was face up floating on the water, looking up towards that damn cloudy sky. I felt sick when I moved an inch, water began to pour out of my throat. I heard someone calling my name, and I saw my friends on a small speedboat shouting at me. I was pulled out of the water and was immediately sped towards a hospital. A few hours later, after I was checked out by a doctor, Tom explained that I had gone missing, and when they turned around, they saw my kayak floating, completely empty. They spent hours looking for me up and down the river, but they couldn't find a trace of me. They reached the end and even called the police, but they couldn't find me until those last moments. I didn't tell them what happened to me, what I think happened to me, because quite frankly, they wouldn't believe me. It's been a crazy couple of weeks since then, and I think I might rethink that thought. I thought I was going crazy. I thought that I really, truly lost it until I started having dreams. Since that day, I've been having nightmares of the river, and I feel myself drowning. Then, when I wake up, I'm completely drenched in cold water. Just the other night, after I jumped out of bed and sat in a corner, thinking that I had finally snapped, I saw people staring back at me from across my bedroom. A young girl, a teenage boy, an older woman, and a middle-aged man. Their bodies were bloated and decayed, dripping river water on the floor. Beeson Street by Zachary Gale. I'm not sure I should be writing this. Hell, I'm not even sure I should continue thinking about it, but I can't stop. Last weekend, I was driving to my grandma's to meet my family for a late dinner. She lives in a cabin in a remote area of Dwagniak, maybe 40 minutes away from my work. It was mid-November and around 6:30 p.m., so the sun was going down as I pulled my pickup out of the parking lot. I've always loved this drive. I would see so many animals as a kid, and there was a swamp if we took a certain route. The full trees made a tall canopy from which the sunlight streamed through in focused beams, and the dense, dark woods always seemed full of adventure and hidden dangers. The fall and winter were always the best, though. The changing leaves were always stunning, and the pile of leaves you could jump in were enormous. And the snow in the winter would cling to the trees, and the plows would almost make the long dirt road outside of Grandma's into a half-pipe that was great to use a sled on. But on this particular night, no such joy would be had. I turned onto Beeson Street, a mere 10 minutes from the cabin, as the sun finally set and darkness settled in. No Time by the Guess Who was playing through my speakers. My headlights made the largely bare trees seem like they were made of bone. I began to reminisce about looking out the window when I was a kid, and imagining some of my favorite cartoon or video game characters running or flying through the woods, fighting and dodging trees. I snapped out of this memory and looked at my clock, panicked. I'd only been on Beeson for 2 minutes, but it had felt far longer. I shook my head and refocused on the road. Trees went by in a blur, and my tires rumbled on the cold, packed earth of the road. Dry leaves blew across the road before being swept up in the wake of my truck and getting tangled in the tall, dead grasses. The sky above was filled with stars, far more stars than I'd normally see in the densely populated town I lived in. The stars seemed to move just slightly too fast, as though they were streaking across the ebon sky, but I was only going 30 miles per hour. I turned my attention back to the road and found it was like a dark tunnel. The skeletal trees reached up like hands trying to grasp the heaven. The fingers curled over the road itself, the road with its maw-like edges and inky blackness ahead. I stared into the darkness. Somewhere in the back of my head, I had registered that my radio had changed from Rush's Distant Early Warning to Pink Floyd's Breathe. The road ahead seemed to stretch forever into the void as the rest of the world appeared to zoom in. In that void, I saw the outline of a shape, somehow darker than the emptiness that surrounded it. I jumped and hit my brakes. They squealed as I came to a hard stop. Panting, I stared ahead. There was nothing. After gathering myself, I took a look at the clock. 6:53. Only 1 minute had passed, but that couldn't be right. I had listened to multiple songs since turning onto Beeson Street. I looked around at the forest. It no longer felt like the woods I knew. It felt denser, darker, more knowing. I hit the gas and started driving. I needed to get to my grandma's. Maybe the clock was broken, but that meant I should be close. I wanted to spend as little time on the wooded road as possible. As I drove, shapes began to appear in the forest. They almost looked like naked people dancing, but they disappeared every time they went behind a tree. Their faces were twisted, misshapen things. I did my best not to look at them and just focus on the road. The radio played song after song. Inagata da Vida by Iron Butterfly, White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane, Tomorrow Never Knows by the Beatles. The clock changed to 6:54. I must have passed the driveway. I tried to do a U-turn, but the road was too narrow. As I shifted into reverse, I accidentally turned out my lights, plunging me into darkness and panic. I fumbled in the dark, trying to find the light lever by the light of the moon in front of me. Once I found it, light flooded the forest in front of me. Dozens of deer stood in the forest facing away from me. Slowly, they turned their heads toward me in unison. Their eyes seemed to glow, and they all seemed off. Some deer were missing an eye or had too many. Others just had their faces mixed up or had a neck, jaw, or leg that was slightly too long or too short. Behind them was where the moon had been a moment before. Then, like a giant eye, the moon reappeared, with a second next to it. I was frozen in place until the deer took a step toward me. Then I turned the wheel and floored it. The clock said 6:56. Tearing down the dirt road, I could see the deer leaping through the trees. Some of them ran on 4 legs, others, 2, with vaguely human arms dangling at their sides. Their heads lolled limply on their necks, tongues hanging out, and dead eyes that always seemed trained on me. I pushed the gas pedal down further, rocketing down the road for what felt like hours. All the while the deer followed and warped, becoming monstrous and distended. Their limbs flailed with too many joints. The clock said 6:57, and the radio began to blare "The End" by the Doors. The deer funneled into the road ahead of me, obscuring my sight as a swirling, writhing mass of flesh and leaves. I watched in horror as the mass parted and the moon eyes loomed ahead, towering over a void. I couldn't stop. Jim Morrison sang, "Ride the King's Highway, Baby." The clock said 6:59. I awoke in my truck sometime later. It was still running on the dark dirt road. I rubbed my face and felt stubble, but I'd shaved before work. Just ahead of me was my grandmother's mailbox and driveway. I looked around and saw no deer. "The End" still played on the radio. The final lyrics sent chills up my spine. I switched the radio off. The clock said 7. Eternal Abyss by Charlie Blackmoore. I hear the hellbirds chirping, singing their songs, when I open my eyes to see the stone-cold walls. I hear the songs day and night, even when the hellfires aren't burning so bright. I miss the earth with a cool spring breeze. I miss the nights where everything was unseen. I miss my wife with her uncanny banter. I miss my children with their witty laughter. And I miss my friends who loved me so, even though I knew things wouldn't forever go. The hot volcanic-like air blows into the 4-walled cell I am stuck in, burning the skin, bubbling it until it bursts, melting it right off my chest. I awake to the calling of the skeleton birds. 6 o'clock in the morning of my 1000th day in hell. I stand up from the bed made of bones. Uncomfortable bastard. I make my way into the stone-walled bathroom to do my business before the hellfires start to spew molten. The skeleton guards stand at their posts just outside the barred door while the other prisoners plead to be let go. I gave up on begging to be let out of the cell about 500 days ago. It was useless to plead for my life when I knew that I would never get out of this place. My cellmate, Nate, is still sound asleep despite all the screams echoing throughout the dusty old chamber. I kick the edge of the bed, causing him to stir. "What the hell, Sutton?" he angrily growls. "Who is Sutton?" I raise my eyebrows. Nate groggily sits up in his bed and looks at me with a weird expression. You are?" "No, I'm sociopathic. I always have been." "Okay, so you're delusional now. That's great." Nate sighs. "Delusional? Nate, you've been here for 1,000 days just like I have. Don't pretend like you have no idea who I am." "You are L.W. Sutton, a writer." "Perhaps I tend to dabble in writing from time to time, but my name has always been Sociopathic Pasta. I really don't understand what the hell's gotten into you, but it's freaking me out." I shake my head. I've shared a cell with Nate for 1,000 days. How could he forget who I am? My name is Sociopathic Pasta. I dabbled in writing during my time on Earth. My normal career was some bullshit 9-to-5 job that I honestly hated, but my joy was making videos on YouTube. I had over 20,000 subscribers to my channel before my world turned black. I honestly don't remember much about what happened in order to land me in hell. However, I do remember being angry enough to hurt someone, and they fought back in self-defense. I remember waking up to the sound of bells chiming, birds calling, and someone standing over me. Look, I feel like all of this is redundant in a way, so I will cut to the important part of my time in hell. I used to be tortured every day But now, I do the torturing. I have quickly climbed up the chain of command in this awful fucking place. I get to watch the terror in people's eyes as I use the hand-carved knife to pierce the soft flesh of men. I watch with joy as tears fall down their cheeks because of the pain I am inflicting. I am a sociopath, and God, do I love it. It doesn't matter where I go or how much I torture people, because at the end of the day, the realization sinks in that I am still trapped in this eternal abyss. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. I hope you enjoyed these stories as much as I did. They were a blast to narrate. So thank you so much to the authors for allowing me to do so. Also, be sure to show them some love. And finally, Nightcrawlers, this is not something I normally do, but I invite you to check out my merch shop. It's listed in the description. I dropped a new design I hope you love. But say hello to the Nightcrawler. Yeah. This little guy was drawn by Yeahman. His info is going to be in the description as well. These shirts are available for purchase now, and they come in a variety of colors. I'm going to drop that link in the description as well. And if you'd like to support, but not in this way, I do have a Buy Me a Coffee link in the description as well. That being said, any amount of support that you guys give is truly appreciated. More than you can ever know. It is humbling enough that you guys enjoy my content. So please, do not feel obligated in any way to show any other type of support. And with that, I am done with the self-promo. So until next time, remember, just because you couldn't see it, doesn't mean it wasn't watching you.